Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly. I will just wait a couple more minutes for some people to arrive, and then we'll start this webinar. So just hold tight for a couple more minutes. Okay, good morning, good day, or good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this joint Biofin and Panorama webinar about innovative protected and conserved area financing with the winners of the 2018 Pathfinder Awards. My name's James Maiden, and I'm the Global Communications Specialist with the Biodiversity Finance Initiative, or Biofin. So during the webinar, we're going to hear from the 4 winners of the Pathfinder Awards for 2018, and we'll have plenty of time at the end of the webinar for questions and discussion with the panelists. And we'll ask you to please write your questions in text in the pane of the GoToWebinar control panel, or you can put your hand up with the little icon and ask it in person. So there's 2 options for asking questions, and we'll address all those, try and address all your questions later on in the webinar. We've also got 2 speakers who need to rush off a little early, and we'll have a brief update about Biofin and Panorama after the Pathfinder Award winners' presentations. So earlier this year, UNDP and IUCN, together with the World Commission on Protected Areas and WildArk, established the Pathfinder Awards for Innovation in Nature Conservation. The awards recognise outstanding and innovative solutions for protected and conserved areas. In its first edition, the partnership, in partnership with Panorama, which is the Solutions for a Healthy Planet initiative, and with Biofin, it focuses on identifying and celebrating innovative approaches tackling one of the persistent challenges that concerns protected and conserved areas around the world. That is sustainable financing and resourcing. While protected and conserved areas provide considerable financial returns in addition to their numerous non-monetary benefits, the global funding gap for effectively managing these sites is immense. Research indicates that this funding gap for protected areas globally is estimated at 30 to 50 billion US dollars per year, yet the protected areas provide an economic return of as much as $50 to $1 invested. Replicable solutions such as those spearheaded by the Pathfinder Award winners show a way to address this challenge. We called for solutions that demonstrate 4 key achievements: success in sustainable financing or resources, new and additional sources of revenues or means to address priorities sustainably, significant finance or resourcing breakthroughs, and successful partnerships developed that achieves new financing or resourcing. We received around 200 nominations by individuals and organisations from all over the world, and particularly from Latin America and South and East Asia. the winners were determined through a two-step process based on the criteria of relevance, innovation, impact, and excellence. And a high-level jury took the final decision. These speakers, the distinguished jury included Inga Anderson, the Director General of IUCN, Yasmin Fald, the Egyptian Minister of Environment, Mark Hutchison, the founder of Wild Ark, Kathy McKinnon, the Chair of IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas, Christiana Pashkapama, the CBD Executive Secretary, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, the Costa Rican Minister of Environment, and Achim Steiner, the UNDP Administrator. The 2018 awards were made up of a cash grant as well as several other areas of recognition, including an invitation to attend the CBD COP14 in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt, just recently held in November, and to receive their awards during the opening plenary and also participate in several other side events at the COP. So the four award winners who you'll hear from today, I'll just briefly introduce them, and then we'll move on to the hearing from them. There were two special commendations, and the first one was to Candace Stevens of BirdLife South Africa and the Government of South Africa for their solution working with biodiversity tax incentives for the South African Protected Areas Network. The other special commendation went to the Masungi Georeserve Foundation in the Philippines, and Billy Demuliang received that award, and for their solution, the Georeserve model, creating creative engineering, building sustainable tourism value in conservation areas. The runner-up went to Colin Campbell of Assist Social Capital for the OASIS platform, which stands for the Opening Access to Sustainable Independent Income Streams for Innovation in Nature Conservation. Sorry, it stands for Opening Access to Sustainable Independent Income Streams. And the winner of the Pathfinder Award this year went to Miriam de Koning from the Prespa Orad Nature Trust, or PONT, for the innovative partnership enhancing conservation and cooperation in the Balkans. So it's very exciting, and I think I'd just like to take this opportunity to congratulate again these outstanding solutions from more than 200 nominations. It's fantastic, and congratulations. We'll get straight into it because a couple of presenters have to leave a little early. So I'd now like to introduce Dale Wright, who is the IBA Conservation Implementation Manager with BirdLife South Africa, who will speak on behalf of Candace Stevens, and he'll have to rush off after presenting. So I'll pass it over to Dale. Over to you.
Hi, morning. Thank you, James. And morning in South Africa, but good day to everybody around the world. And yeah, thanks very much for having me. So my name is Dale Wright. As James mentioned, I'm the IBA Conservation Implementation Manager for BirdLife South Africa. But of course, I can't take any credit for the award. Today, I'm presenting on behalf of my colleague, Candace Stevens. She's the Policy and Advocacy Program Manager at BirdLife South Africa. And together with another colleague, Daniel Marnovic, the three of us work quite extensively on protected area establishment and protected area policy here in South Africa and at global levels. So today I'm going to work through the work that Candace did, which secured her the special commendation for the Pathfinder Award. Firstly, a little bit of background. And in South Africa, we're a mega diverse country, one of the 17 in the world, but also we have approximately 75% of our land held in private ownership. And so this necessitated the need for a tool which allowed us to declare protected and conservation areas on either privately or communally owned land. And as you can see from the slide here, we offer a range of different contractual agreements to the private and communal landowners, and they move up in increasing responsibility and increasing commitment. And with this increasing commitment, so the landowners receive an increasing benefit for doing so. And generally, the highest level, the nature reserve and national park, is where the biodiversity tax incentive is situated at the moment. So just to talk you through the process of getting the tax incentive initiated in South Africa, when Candace Stevens first joined BirdLife South Africa, there were a number of incentives which had been written into our national legislation, but at the time they had never been tested, and it was felt that some of them were actually not going to be of much value to landowners. So firstly, Candace went around identifying how she could revise these incentives to provide real value. She then underwent an extensive engagement with our National Treasury, as well as the Protected Area Community of Practice, and that resulted in the new amended legislation, an incentive known as Section 37D. That was incorporated into national legislation, and very soon after that, she was able to test it with a willing landowner at one of our biodiversity stewardship sites, and subsequently that landowner had the tax incentive incorporated on their tax return, and this was a first for South Africa. And I'll talk you a little bit through the practical example of that tax return towards the end of the presentation. And now we're working towards actually mainstreaming this tax return across those landowners who have committed to the highest level of biodiversity conservation on their land. So what was the innovation? Well, the first point is that a number of factors make this tax incentive fairly unique. One of the main ones is that it is based on the value of land which is declared as a protected area. So this essentially aligns directly with the degree of commitment that the landowner is making, in that they are setting aside this land, often in perpetuity, for biodiversity conservation purposes. And 100% of the value of the land which is set aside is able to be recovered over a period of 25 years, which allows a really long-term, very significant tax break to those landowners. It's also a deduction which is not received in the ordinary course of business. And an example of that is that there are a number of agricultural tax incentives which are available. Many of our private landowners who enter into protected area declarations do so with components of agriculture in their commercial business, and they receive benefits via those rebates and those tax incentives. And so we needed one that was restricted solely to biodiversity conservation. And then the nice thing is that this affects all types of legal entities, private landowners, commercial entities, and our communal landowners, who are also a very big part of the conservation landscape in South Africa. So what is the actual impact of these tax incentives? The main one, of course, is that it secures our key biodiversity areas in the long term. And as I mentioned, we have one of the highest biodiversities in the world, being a mega diverse country. And at the moment, I think we're sitting on nearly 15% coverage in terms of protected areas. And so we do have a way to go to meeting the Aichi targets. And so we need to look at any tools we could have available to allow us to meet those targets. And so we look to the Declaration of Protected Areas. What's important to understand here is that when a landowner declares a protected area on their land, they firstly might be foregoing income, which could be generated off that same land. So for example, if they were able to run cattle on a piece of property, instead they set it aside for conservation, they experience a loss of income. And also importantly, when we declare protected areas, we know, and as James pointed out in the introduction, that there are extensive management gaps that exist. And what we want to avoid, of course, is the paper park situation from arising. And so we need to make sure that management costs are covered for these protected areas going forward. And so when you're able to offset some of the costs of the declaration, landowners in turn can feed that back into the management of that particular protected area. And this leads to financial sustainability if they're then able to employ people, provide employment for field rangers or ecologists who might work on the property. We're growing jobs in the local economy, and we're able to grow our wildlife economy in South Africa. And what's really important about this is that it is incorporated within our National Revenue Service, SARS as they're known locally, the South African Revenue Service. And so essentially, any landowner could approach their own tax practitioner, and with an understanding of how their tax incentive works, they can then access it. And that, I think, allows it to be implemented at a much wider scale. So landowners and businesses benefit economically and socially as the tax breaks reduce the amount of tax they owe, and that frees up the tax flow and allows them to then enhance activities such as ecotourism. So what were the building blocks, the fundamental stepping stones to getting this tax incentive entrenched in legislation and now moving it forward into a successful implementation? One of the first is that in South Africa, and it's listed here as point number 5, we are fortunate to have a very strong legislative and policy framework which guides our protected area establishment. The same applies for the privately protected areas. The establishment of the privately protected areas is also incorporated into the legislation, and that provides that supporting framework through which we can incorporate these kinds of benefits. A second important point is there's very strong collaboration across the public, private, and civil society sectors. We have what we call the National Technical Working Group, a protected areas technical task team. And these groups meet and they bring together NGOs such as myself, Candice, and Daniel working for BirdLife South Africa, and many others in South Africa who are involved in protected area establishment. It links those NGOs with the government agencies, normally our provincial agencies who are implementing protected area establishment, as well as national agencies. And in this very cohesive community of practice, we thrash out the most important issues facing protected area establishment at the time, and we're able to have very robust debates and move our practice forward. And that, I think, is one of the very strong points of the South African framework that we find ourselves in. Obviously, critical to all of this were the skills that Candice Stevens herself brought to the table, and her niche technical skills in tax, understanding how to engage with our revenue service, understanding how tax breaks could become real for landowners. And that really was what elevated these tax incentives to the next level. And of course, you can't have all of that without going back to the grassroots and ensuring that when you go and work with landowners on the ground, you're able to actually implement these with a landowner and then take it through to testing and success. And fortunately, through our community of practice, we engage a lot with landowners on the ground. And so we have that close grassroots engagement. And so you really have from a local up to national level, the continuum of interactions that sort of provides the basis and the building blocks for the successful implementation of this tax return. So here's just a closing example, just to help you kind of understand exactly how the tax return works. And we take the example of a private commercial tourism operation. In this case, we call them the Big Five Lodge. And they went and decided that because they're interested in nature conservation, they want to operate a commercial tourism area, they secure their land, they set it aside in a biodiversity stewardship agreement. They go for the highest level of commitment. They choose a nature reserve status. And the site is fortunately also obviously a strategic water source area, and it's been a job creation hub as well. People employed, as I mentioned earlier, through field rangers or ecologists. And the effective management of the site, as you can read here, conserves biodiversity. It's able to create jobs. And critically in South Africa, we're a water-stressed country. We need to be looking after our strategic water source areas and our water catchments. And that's another thing that this site does. And so clearly, the benefits here far outweigh any of the costs. But that notwithstanding, we still need to be able to provide some incentive to help cover those costs for the landowner. And in this instance, because the size of the land was 10,000 hectares and the value is quite high because it's being used for ecotourism, it led to a valuation, a property valuation of a book value of nearly $7.1 million. And so that essentially was the value of the tax break that the landowner is now able to recoup over the next 25 years. And this is really critical in this particular example is as you're getting a commercial tourism venture off the ground, you may be running at a loss at first. And in this case, they're actually able to hold over tax gains for future years. And so the sustainability really is long-term. So I think that's the tax incentive in South Africa in a nutshell. And I would really encourage you to visit the Pathfinder website. Candice has laid out the details of the tax incentive there. There's more information. Visit our BirdLife South Africa website. There's information on Candice's tax work. There's also information on some of the other work that our team has done in terms of privately protected areas policy. We've recently published a paper regarding privately protected areas and the challenges and opportunities that they face here in South Africa, which we hope would be transferable to other countries as well. So I would encourage you to visit those resources. And also, if you're interested, I'm sure you can drop Candice an email, candice.stevens@birdlife.org.za, or myself, dale.wright@birdlife.org.za, and follow up with us if you're interested in more information. So thanks very much. And James, I'll hand back over to you.
Thanks very much, Dale, and I appreciate the time. I believe Dale's at a wedding, so where he's been making this presentation. So thanks for taking the time to do that. And we'll be sharing these presentations and the video recording of this webinar with everyone who's on this webinar later on, so everyone can have access to follow up later on. I'd now like to ask Colin Campbell, the founder and executive director of Social Assist Capital, to deliver his presentation, and also acknowledging that Colin will have to rush off afterwards, but we will have his colleague Tabitha Ewing to stick around for the discussion and field any questions about Oasis, their solution that was the runner-up for the Pathfinder Award. So over to you, Colin. Thanks.
Thanks, James. And hello to everybody that's listening. It's quite strange to some extent talking to my computer here in this room, knowing that there's people all over the world listening to this. So I hope you enjoy the presentation. It's an honour to be part of Panorama and the Pathfinder Awards, and we're very pleased to have been nominated and receiver of the runner-up award. So yeah, we'd like to introduce you to OASIS, which, as James said, stands for Opening Access to Sustainable Independent Income Streams. And this is an initiative which has been developed by Assist Social Capital, which is a social enterprise and community interest company. The platform was launched in Lima in Peru in 2016 at the Fourth World Congress of Biosphere Reserves. So a little bit of introduction about the whole process. My background is in social enterprise, which is businesses which reinvest their profits back into social and environmental outcomes. Developed the process in Scotland over the last 20 years. I've worked at a national level in Scotland, working with government, local government, and largely finding ways for grassroots organisations who can come together, become communities of practice, and through that process begin to influence policy and access new resources investment. In 2011, I went to a conference in Sweden, which was Euro Man and the Biosphere initiative. And I was given presentations on social enterprise, social capital, which is the fundamental asset which we use, which I'll say a little bit more about, and also sustainable public procurement. I had never heard of Biosphere Reserves or Man in the Biosphere initiative by UNESCO, but I realised that there was a very strong correlation between what social enterprises are set up to do and the whole notion of trading for the benefit of people and also the planet. So what we were aiming to do was to, from that point on, we began to build an interest in a group of practice of people who are interested in using a business approach to move away from this idea of the extractive economy and to begin to look at ways that we could use local resources within areas of high biodiversity, which delivered both for the conservation aims and objectives of the biosphere reserves, but also provided opportunity for people who were looking for ways to remain in their communities and at the same time have jobs. So we wanted to move away from an extractive community. We also realised through the process that there was a significant disconnect between this whole notion of conservation and how to engage business. And that if you weren't only looking at a financial impact, then there was an issue around how we could demonstrate what was the positive outcome of these kind of businesses. It also became very clear that many of these businesses were struggling to access the right kind of support, specialist support for them, and investment in order to help their businesses grow, which is something which is more typical in the traditional business sector. And that clearly a lot of these entrepreneurs who wanted to respond to the needs of their community were isolated, and often that is actually geographically isolated from their peers, but also from the marketplace. So these are the kind of background about why we began to work on this whole idea of OASIS and the platform OASIS. As I said, we're a social enterprise ourselves. Our main focus is on building social capital, which is about connected, collaborative networks of like-minded people. And we also use that as a methodology to demonstrate social impact by identifying, visualizing and quantifying connectivity, which then leads to access to other resources. And it's also an excellent opportunity for people who previously felt isolated to begin to learn much more quickly, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel, and they can speed up their process of development. So the building blocks of how we went about this whole process was to begin to look at a replicable framework, which was something that we had already done in Scotland at a national level. And we believe that this can be applied to biosphere reserves, but also any other kind of protected area, and a regional approach to sustainable economic development. So we developed a document which is a skeleton framework which can be adapted to suit any specific area, because often the legal setup in different countries is different, so you need to take that into account. By using the framework, you can design a route map that is specifically targeted at those local communities, the various different social enterprises that are possible in that area, in order to provide opportunities for businesses which are in harmony with people and planet. And so we put together a working group from a range of different countries, and Europe, Asia, for example, and working on these founding principles of public participation, social enterprise, social investment, and sustainable public procurement. So OASIS was the outcome of this process. As we've already said, it's about opening access to independent income streams. And by independent, we mean money that is coming through the business as opposed to through grants. We aim to make this as inclusive as possible. So having an online platform means that it's much more accessible to people as we begin to move towards a mobile first process with smartphones. And this is the kind of information that you can get access to anywhere in the world. And we also wanted to raise awareness of this whole idea of social entrepreneurship and how that can build value within this idea of protected areas. Often there's a sense that protected areas means that you aren't allowed to run businesses in them, and we wanted to change that perception and actually show that the protected area provides added value, added economic value to the whole issue of a protected area. And then we wanted to raise awareness, so we began collecting socioeconomic indicators of the impact of these organisations. We aggregated them, and by aggregating them, we can begin to raise awareness of these initiatives to potential investors who often find it difficult to find businesses that are delivering in the areas of interest that they have. So that's the process that we went along. We launched in 2016 in Peru, as I said, and we fairly rapidly, we had 15 biosphere reserves in 11 different countries across the world interested in this. And then we began the process of building, through direct relationships with the biosphere reserves, a list of organisations and businesses that fitted on the platform. And we registered them there. They have their own account. They can add value to their own businesses by raising awareness, but also the collective impact for the protected area, the biosphere reserve. And that allowed us to begin to benchmark the kind of activity that was happening in these areas. As I said, by building this connectivity, we provide opportunities for entrepreneurs who might be very isolated to gain access to new ideas, to information and advice. And this is the other thing that we did with the planning arrangement. We began to tap them into local resources, business support agencies, and work with local government and national government to look at policy that could be supported with the intention of improving the health and well-being of the businesses and providing them with access to money and investment. So we've seen significant progress at a policy level. The work we did ended up being part of the Man and Biosphere Reserve 10-year action plan, which is now across 669 biosphere reserves in 120 countries. So there's a political policy framework, which means that social entrepreneurs are seen as a key resource for delivering on the aims and objectives of these protected areas, and we are able to measure the impact going forward. In order to do this, earlier this year, we launched the first biennial report called Shining a Light in the Anthropocene, which puts a focus on entrepreneurship within protected areas. And we were able to collect information which demonstrated that some of these organisations, which on their own might be relatively small, collectively and aggregated, they have significant impact, financial and economic benefit, without destroying their local natural assets and habitats, and reinvesting that money into business opportunities for young people, for women, and at the same time delivering on the SDGs. With this information, we were able to estimate that there are probably something like 8 million businesses in the biosphere reserves alone who are working in harmony with this idea of trading for people and planet. So the intention is to build on this process, bring together more and more people, and raise awareness of the fantastic work that is happening in these areas. These are just a couple of examples of what we've been doing. So we connected the social enterprise working in art and culture and local community transport in Scotland with an initiative in Sweden, which helped them build relationships. We've been working with Vietnam for the last 4 years. They have now developed a national program to roll social entrepreneurship out across their 9 biosphere reserves. And in Cap Ba Biosphere Reserve, down in the picture at the bottom left, they have a small investment fund which they are now beginning to build into a social investment fund to look at how they can support businesses. And we connected with social enterprises within a biosphere reserve in Italy, one of them being a creator of a producer of honey. And they have a very well-established honey business, and we developed a webinar where they gave a presentation to a group in Ghana in Bia Biosphere Reserve, which is 6 hours away from the nearest market town of Accra. And that led to the honey farmers in Ghana having the opportunity to sell all their honey to the Australian market. So by building this bridge of knowledge, we've also opened up opportunities and investment opportunities for these businesses that otherwise would have been completely isolated. So as a previous speaker said, we are very happy to engage with anyone who finds this whole idea of being on the platform of interest. We want to open it out beyond biosphere reserves, because there are many entrepreneurs out there who are doing fantastic work that we would like to open up new opportunities to. We're currently talking to UNESCO in Costa Rica about developing a project there across 4 different biosphere reserves. And we're also talking to the Scottish Government and UNDP in their ethical finance initiative to become part of a pipeline of pipelines, which was looking at £100 million ethical bond, which we can help direct to some of these businesses that we've been talking about. So there's a growing number of opportunities, and the more businesses we have on the platform, the more opportunities there will be. So thank you very much for listening. We hope to have the opportunity to speak to more of you in person, myself and my colleague Tabby, who will be here to take any questions that I've got to leave. And our contact details are here on the last slide. So please do get in touch with myself or Tabby, and best of luck with all your projects. Thanks, James.
Thanks so much, Colin. And I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs and private sector and public sector people who'd be very interested in your platform. And thanks for joining the webinar. I know he's got to rush off to another meeting. And as he mentioned, Tabby will be sticking around to answer any questions you might have later on to do with Oasis. I'd now like to invite Billy Demuliang. She's the trustee and advocacy officer of Masungi Georeserve Foundation to tell us all about the Masungi Georeserve in the Philippines. Thanks, Billy, and over to you.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce the Masungi Georeserve from the Philippines. We are a 430-hectare conservation area, about 47 kilometers east of Manila. And what we do is we protect historic limestone formations and significant biodiversity in this scarce ecosystem. So our story really started in 1996. So as you can see, the area is completely devoid of life. Trees are gone, the rocks are bare, and as you can imagine, this area was devastated by large and small-scale illegal logging, quarrying, urbanization, and land speculation. And so it was very important to protect the area and conserve it. And after 20 years, this is what it looks like. So after 20 years of hard work and dedicated conservation, we've been able to restore the secondary forest. Almost the entire forest cover is restored, and we have the birds and the wildlife, including a lot of endemic species, now coming back to live with us. So as you can imagine, we are only 40 kilometers outside of our biggest city. And so the birds that you can see here are actually very unique already for that distance from the city. So those are one of the indicators that we are able to provide a sanctuary for wildlife and of course for people coming from the city. After 20 years of conservation, we realized that it wasn't enough to keep it with us. It had to be sustainable. And that's when we decided to open the GeoReserve to limited visits for people who want to get in touch with their environment. So through 3 years that we've been opened, we've received tremendous success from all of the visitors that came to the area. And this, as you can see on the screen, is one of our main features or highlights in the trail, and it's called the Duyan. It's an 80-meter long hammock that goes atop the forest canopy. So we ask ourselves through the Pathfinder Award and just looking back on our past 3 years, what really made us unique, what made the GeoServe quite successful, because as everyone knows, tourism is not new. Tourism is not new in protected and conserved areas. So our unique solution or innovation is actually two things. It's creative engineering together with policy enforcement in promoting long-term and sustainable value for conserved areas. So creative engineering is what brings out or enhances the natural character of the area, while policy enforcement is what preserves and what makes sure that the integrity of the area, including whatever man-made structures are there, are maintained for the long term. So right now, the GeoReserve already employs about 100 local park rangers, and we get thousands of visitors every year, and we're happy to be able to introduce urbanites, young Filipinos to what really is the treasure of the Philippines, and that's our biodiversity and our environment. So to go into one building block, which is creative engineering, we do a lot of biomimicry work, which means we get inspiration from what is already in nature. So for example, we have a lot of spiders in the area, and when we want to create a vista point or a viewing point for guests, we think about what are the best materials and how can we create this viewing point without harming the rocks and the natural environment. So this one is an idea that came from one of our local park rangers. It's to build a suspended viewing platform in the shape of a spider web. And to your right, you will see the largest lake in the Philippines, and to the left is the longest mountain range in the Philippines. So this is one of the most iconic spots inside the trail. This is another part of the trail, which is inspired by the shape of a monitor lizard perched on a rock. So this is called the monitor lizard, and this one is the sawa or the python. So it's a rapid exit made of ropes that gets you from one side to the other at the end of the trail, because a lot of the guests actually get cramps in this area. And we also make use of a lot of local materials that you can find in nature. So these are bamboo, and they are crafted into the shape of a butterfly, just one of the accents. inside the trails. And these are discarded snail shells, which we used for the bathrooms or the toilets inside the trails. So I'll just play the short video to give you more of a sense of the expanse of the georeserve. This is one of the highest peaks inside the area, which is called the Tatay or Father. So this is the Father Rock. Again, this is the sapot or the spider web from above and one of our bridges. And then this is the hammock or the duyan. This is Tatay again and one of the longest bridges inside the georeserve, which is called the Tulay. Okay, now we go to the second building block, which is as important as the first. It's policy enforcement, and this is informed by the georeserve model. So the georeserve is actually a trademarked innovation in the Philippines. It's inspired by the UNESCO Geoparks, which incorporates a threefold advocacy of environment protection, education, research, and sustainable development through geotourism in particular. So tourism that sustains or enhances the geographical character of a place, including everything from its history, the heritage, culture, food, and of course, the well-being of residents. So some principles that we use in accordance to geotourism is being able to bring out a unique sense of place or the character of a place, being able to use tourism as a means towards benefit of the area. Of course, being able to employ the locals and training them to be able to provide a world-class service. We have high priority to implement quality over quantity. So we implement visits inside the georeserve strictly on a reservation basis, and there's only one group that can come in at a certain time. There's also market selectivity and diversity. So we don't sell the visits to the georeserve to anyone. We have a very clear idea of who these will be, and these are people who want to be responsible tourists and who want to get to know nature more. If the expectation is different, we try our best to communicate the real objective of being able to visit the georeserve, such that it is more of a privilege and not a right to be able to enjoy the area. So on education, we do a lot of research with geologists, naturalists, biologists on the different geological formations in the area. We partner with the local schools to be able to inculcate their local biodiversity into their culture and their knowledge, produce a storybook, and conduct geotourism fairs. This is one of what we protect inside, which is the giant cloud rat, the jade vine, which in Masungi is purple, where in other places in the Philippines it's colored jade as its name. But it's different because of the unique karst ecosystem that you can find in Masungi, and of course our shells. On sustainable development, we engage the local people. Some of them are from the indigenous tribe. Some of them are previously illegal loggers and quarry operators. So other important aspects of policy enforcement are visitor management. So we have a digital system which manages traffic inside the georeserve. We have preconditions which they have to agree to before going into the georeserve. And of course, the monitoring implementation by all our park rangers. So we actually have a 3,000 peso penalty for every violation on its first instance. A good news as well is that we will be able to scale this visitor management policies. We recently received a grant from one of the largest tech companies in the world to be able to apply our learnings in visitor management to a mobile app that can be used by other nature-based destinations. So that's one thing that we're excited about. Area planning is also very important. So there are multiple zones within the georeserve, and only in the multi-use zones and the tourism zones are we able to build the structures. And all the structures are actually temporary. As you can see, they're made of rope, they're made of cable. They can easily be changed or moved when needed. And we have a strict maintenance policy. Every week we check all of these structures and we check all of the trails to make sure they're clean and to make sure they're ready for visits and park ranger work. Community benefit is also very important to us. Colin mentioned about social enterprise, and we try to include this in our daily operations. Our food is sourced from the park rangers and from local farms, and we help them be able to create enterprises like soap enterprises, food enterprises, to be able to serve our guests as well. So that's a few things about the Masungi Reserve. You can read more about us on the Panorama page, and you can also follow us on our Facebook and Instagram, and we would love to connect if anybody needs some more information or can contribute to the cause. So thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Billy, and wonderful to see the amazing pictures from Masungi. And I'm sure not only would there be many people listening that can learn from some of those innovative strategies in Masungi, but I think we'd all like to go and visit as well. I'd now like to invite Miriam de Kooning, the Executive Director of the Prespa Orad Nature Trust and the winner of the Pathfinder Award for 2018, to join us and tell us more about PONT and its Transboundary Trust Fund. Miriam, welcome, and over to you.
Yes, James, thank you. I tried to put the presentation on the full screen, so give me a minute. There we go. Yeah, very happy to present Prespa Orad Nature Trust, an innovative partnership enhancing conservation and cooperation. Prespa Orad Nature Trust, it's a private foundation under German law based in Germany, and it's independent. It's based in Germany because it's a transboundary trust fund operating in the Balkans, and it's funding government organizations, mainly protected area agencies, NGOs and research institutes. It's really focused on co-financing, creating of synergies, partnerships, and to avoid overlap. It's leverage political commitment and government funding, and it gives grants to support capacity development and conservation objectives that includes transboundary activities and essential protected operation cost in line with respective management plans. As you can see, the geographical region PONT is working in, the 3 countries, Albania, it has the Prespa National Park in Albania. A similar named park is in Greece, the Prespa National Park in Greece. And then we have 4 protected areas in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. That's the Galicia National Park, Pallister National Park, the Prespa Lake Monument of Nature, and the Ezerani Nature Park. I want to zoom in a little bit more on the building blocks of the solution and what made PONT create, what made the creation of PONT in 2015. It was really a partnership between the MAVA Foundation and the KfW, that's the German Development Bank, on behalf of the German government. And it's really to support biodiversity hotspot. And for these 2 donors that have really invested a lot of finances in conservation in the area to sustain their efforts in perpetuity. Both donors gave an endowment and a sinking fund, which gives us an annual year drawdown of 1.5 to 2 million euros to be used until 2030. But of course, we hope that our endowment capital really start working well, and that it also means that we have enough funding after 2030. Bringing 2 partners together is all about creation of synergies. That means MAVA was mainly working in Greece, also in the 2 other countries, but with a focus on Greece. KfW was mainly working in Albania and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. And by joining together, we can cover the entire ecoregion and also work with protected areas and NGOs and benefit from co-financing. The initiative of PONT was really supported by many other initiatives. WWF Greece contributed a lot, Euronatur, Frankfurt Zoological Society. We benefited a lot of the expertise of the Caucasus Nature Fund and the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund. And all of these people coming together created POND, which is the main building block 1. If we go to building block 2, we look at the POND strategy, which really promotes transboundary cooperation between government and non-government partners. And this was really, our strategy didn't start from scratch. It was based on 25 years of experience of partners working in the region. It was really about what are still the conservation gaps, what are the gaps in capacities, what are financing gaps. Based on this experience and in consultation with protected areas, we build on that strategy. And it also encouraged long-term transboundary cooperation, although I must say that the formal transboundary cooperation between the countries are quite still very weak. But on a local level, there's a lot of transboundary cooperation despite the lack of these formal institutions, and that we promote via our strategy. So the building block 2 is really about the POND strategy based on previous experiences. If we go to building block 3, what POND really does is this PRESPA eco-region hotspot, this biodiversity hotspot. It's really to enable an approach that is on the whole eco-region, and that is really important for the management of habitats and wildlife on the landscape level. And we benefit a lot of working together with PRESPA-Net. PRESPA-Net is a network of environmental NGOs for PRESPA, with an NGO based in each of the 3 countries. And these 3 NGOs have worked a lot together over the last years, and especially the last 5 years, when they really established themselves and really facilitating this integrated landscape approach. Now that POND is also financing the protected areas, there's also more opportunity for the protected areas in the 3 countries to regularly exchange. We just had a transboundary workshop last week where all the managers came and other staff of protected areas and share lessons learned. One of the examples we support at the moment is a transboundary large carnivore project, and with camera traps in the 3 countries, and also a lot of analysis of large carnivores in the region. We have also supported the opening of local offices of NGOs in the region, so really to have good participation with local people and really have more impact on the ground. That's the building block 3. If we zoom in to the last building block, which is not yet on the Panorama platform, but I mention it, is we are based in Germany. We have an office in Frankfurt that is a shared service office. It's called the Nature Trust Alliance. And this office helps POND, but also the Caucasus Nature Fund and the Blue Action Fund, 2 other conservation trust funds, with their administration. So they help us with the grant payments, doing the accounting, helping with our audits, and of course, very important for Conservation Trust Fund, the investment support to help with investment of our capital and to help to try to generate good returns on our capital. They also work on our website and help us with the communication. And this building block I want to mention because by pooling these resources, we actually save cost on our administrative purposes, and therefore we can focus more on the grant program and also have more means for the grant program. A little bit about the impact, and I want to highlight an example of the Society for the Protection of PRESPA. It's an NGO that works in Greece since 1991. It was supported by MAVA Foundation since 1991 with long-term stable core financing. And POND took over that financing from MAVA in 2016. But because there's a very long-term stable co-financing and core funding of this NGO, SPP was able also to really attract a lot of other funders to finance their work. And so it really increased their financial portfolio, and they got less dependent on the resources of MAVA and POND from 80 to 64%. Most important, of course, is long-term, stable core financing is needed to have that biodiversity impact. And you can see some of the results SPP had over the years, where in 1991 there were 200 pairs of Dalmatian pelicans, and in 2007 they had over 1,000 pairs, which is really a huge impact. Also on the glossy ibis, they had almost a locally extinct bird, and in 2007, 13 pairs were back in the Prespa area. Some reflections from my side on pond, the solution. Many people have asked me if they think that pond can be replicated. Yes, I think what we finance, core financing for NGOs, standard operations of protected areas, there's a need all over the world to finance that. Often the resources from the governments are not enough, and this co-financing can be very beneficial for these protected areas to be more effective. It of course depends a lot on the willingness of donors and partners coming together for a certain ecoregion biodiversity hotspot to provide this long-term financing, and I hope other donors will follow the example of the MAVA Foundation and KfW. I'm just a reflection on the panorama solution approach. I'm quite an ambassador of this approach because I like really to work with it, to write down lessons learned, and also for people to know that if you use this methodology, it's the second time that I make a solution, and it's the second time that over time I've added building blocks, because of course your solutions are dynamic and you always have new lessons learned. When I wrote down this solution in July, I didn't have a fourth building block, and now I have one. So I keep on updating it over time and sharing lessons learned. I here have another solution for you in the last slide with somebody from Albania, Prespa, saying thank you and having a natural solution wearing on his head. You see our webpage for more information and our email address to have any information you want to share. Please contact us, and we are very willing to reach out to you. Thank you very much, and back to James.
Thanks so much, Miriam. Now, before we get to questions, and we've got one already, but we'll just very briefly give a quick update on Biofin and Panorama. So for those of you who don't know Biofin, Biofin promotes national platforms and regional and global dialogues that help countries to accelerate the reduction of their finance needs and to the point where biodiversity targets are no longer hampered by a lack of investment. Biofin, we recognise that biodiversity finance is not only about mobilising new resources, and it's concerned with delivering better on what is available, reallocating resources from where they harm to where they help, and acting today to reduce the need for future investments. Biofins are managed by UNDP, and already 36 countries have started the process across Europe, Asia Pacific, Africa, and Latin America. Biofin uses detailed country-level assessments to develop a biodiversity finance plan, drawing on qualitative and quantitative data and innovative methodologies, as well as expert input. Its flagship publication, which guides countries through this process, is the Biofin Workbook, which its third edition was launched at the COP recently in November. Here's the workbook cover here, and that's available online. It provides an innovative, stepwise and adaptable approach that enables countries to assess their policy, institutional and economic context for biodiversity finance and map the existing finance solutions. It then measures and analyses current biodiversity expenditures from the public and private sectors, donors and civil society. Sorry, I just realised the screen wasn't showing. And then it makes a reliable estimate of finance needed to achieve a country's biodiversity goals and compares this to the current biodiversity expenditures and other resources available, and finally develops a finance plan that identifies and mobilises the resources and policies required to implement the most suitable finance solutions. And of course, Biofin's one of its key objectives is seeking buy-in from finance and environmental stakeholders and decision makers such as the Ministries of Finance and Environment, as well as the private sector and other NGOs, to identify and mobilise policies, resources, institutional capacities to implement the right suite of biodiversity finance solutions for that country. There's lots of interesting examples from across the biofin countries, and which you can see on the biofin website, as well as a new catalogue of more than 150 biodiversity finance solutions that have been catalogued and mapped, and that are available for countries to take up. So plenty more to learn about biofin. But I'd now like to get a quick update from Marie Fishborn, who's from IUCN, and she leads IUCN's Protected Area Solutions. She's going to tell us more about Panorama. And Marie, of course, anything more you'd like to add as the anchor, I would say, for the Pathfinder Awards. And I'd just also like to say it's been great to work with not only the winners, but all the people involved from IUCN and UNDP and WildArk and Biofin putting together the Pathfinder Award, and it's been great to be involved in this opening, this inaugural year. So Marie, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, James. And I can only second what you just said, and that's been fantastic organizing this initial edition of the Pathfinder Award. I hope my screen is showing all right. So Panorama is an initiative that's really about learning from what works, and you heard it mentioned a few times already in the presentations. It's a partnership initiative that promotes specific solutions for nature conservation and sustainable development. So through Panorama, we identify, analyze, document, and promote success stories from a vast range of so-called solution providers and across multiple interlinked thematic communities, such as protected areas, marine and coastal, or business engagement. You can see the current thematic communities on the right side of this slide, and we just launched the most recent one, business engagement, at the CBD COP, and there are further ones in the pipeline already. So it's open for really any organization or individually to contribute principally, and solutions are subjected to a peer review process and are then published on a web platform. Panorama is based on a universally applicable learning methodology and a rather unique case study format, which breaks solutions down into their replicable core components, or building blocks, as we call them, really recognizing that a solution as a whole, which is an initiative or perhaps a project, is usually completely context specific. But individual elements of that solution might have wider applicability. So those are the building blocks. And you heard them mentioned in the presentations by the winners as they spoke about the components of their solutions. The ultimate aim behind this is really to facilitate replication of these solutions by making knowledge available in a very structured, easily accessible format, and by connecting solution providers with potential replicators for mutual learning from proven success. Panorama combines online and offline peer-to-peer learning. So the backbone is our web platform, which is the database of the solutions essentially. But we also foster learning and provide visibilities for the solutions through, for example, in-person events, webinars such as this one, publications, social media, and a number of other channels and tools. It's currently a partnership of 7 organizations and growing, so we're very pleased that UNDP just recently joined as the 7th Panorama partner, actually coming out of the Pathfinder Awards collaboration, so that was a fantastic outcome of that collaboration. And within that partnership, IUCN and GIZ together provide a coordination function. So, as I mentioned, it's really open for anyone to contribute. You can see the URL of the web platform here on the slide, so I would strongly encourage you to visit it to explore our solutions portfolio And you can also find the detailed descriptions of the 4 award-winning solutions on the platform, along with over 450 other solutions, and also contribute your own if you're interested. And just to make the link back to the Pathfinder Award, it was very closely tied to Panorama in that all relevant and eligible nominations through a description of the nominated innovation are represented on the Panorama web platform, so are published as solutions. So if you're interested in exploring other solutions around protected and conserved area financing and resourcing that we sourced, so to say, through the award, then do visit the platform as well. And we're very much looking forward to being involved in future editions of the award. Thank you. Back to James.
Thanks so much, Marie. And I must say the Panorama platform, it does really provide a succinct and concise way of presenting these solutions, and you can really download a lot of information in a short time, and it's a great platform. So now we'll field some questions. We've got a couple already. Please, if you've got a question, you can put your hand up by clicking the little hand icon, and you can ask your question using your voice. I'll unmute you, or please write a question in the question pane, and I'll read it out and forward it to the right person. So we might start with going back to a question for Billy and Masungi. The question's facing multiple interrelated challenges, including protecting the other remaining forests and increasing food production in sustainable and resilient ways. Is there any possibility in replicating your work in the manner where there will be an energy, water, food, healthcare nexus? Billy, would you like to comment on that?
Hi. So if I got the question correctly, it's if the model of creative engineering and policy enforcement can be applied to other areas with a different nature. Is that correct, James? Could you help me understand a bit more?
Yeah, I think so. Is there ways to replicate across different sectors, perhaps within an ecosystem or across a broader region?
Yeah. So I think our solution has a lot to do with infrastructure, right? So being able to build something out of things that are local but are not usually thought of to put together. So if you're talking about agricultural lands and producing sustainable agritourism from there and being able to provide experiences and being able to put in the low impact infrastructure in those agricultural areas or in wetlands or in oceans and beaches, then I think absolutely it can be replicated, but you do need to find the skills to be able to do so and to do a lot of research. In Masungi, we did do a lot of research on the knowledge aspect and knowing, okay, what do we highlight in these tourism experiences? But at the same time, we also have local craftsmen present, and they're actually the ones who have the ideas on what to do and who are familiar with the location and the rough terrain and everything. So it's their resourcefulness. So to be able to replicate that, you also need to find people, ideas, materials, and put all of those together to be able to create creative engineering structures or creative engineering experiences for people. So I think absolutely it can be replicable, but you do need the building blocks and you do need the skills and the crafts to be able to do that.
Just to follow up, Billy, from the same person asking, are you applying any renewable energy applications in the park?
Not yet. We've explored being able to use solar. We are already using solar. So for example, for our night trail, where there's some dim lights lighting up the trail, but only at the minimum scale. We haven't been able to see opportunities or look for opportunities for large-scale renewable energy, but that is something that we can definitely make use of. So if he or she has any ideas on where we can get that support, then we'd be very grateful.
Sure, I'll ask him to follow up with you after. We'll go to a question now for Miriam and Pont. The question is, did you face any challenges with the legal framework for the Transboundary Fund in each of the 3 countries? Did all the countries have the required legislation already in place, or did any amendments need to be made? Miriam?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it's clear that PONT was established offshore in Germany because to really have investments in the Balkan countries, maybe it was not so convenient. That's why PONT decided to have the foundation registered in Germany. But the local legislation, we have framework agreement with Albania and with the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. It's all in place to operate our financing for the protected areas, as it's based from a framework agreement with the Ministry of Environment. So, but to really run a trust fund from the region, it was quite difficult, and it is also difficult to choose one of the countries. That's why PONT was established as a transboundary trust fund. It was established offshore in Germany, where also the investments are handled. I hope that answered the questions. Back to you, James.
Thank you. We've got a question now with someone with their hand up. I'll unmute Sean Nazarali and he can ask the question directly. Sean, you should be.
Okay, thank you very much, James. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm talking to you from Biofund Mozambique, which is a national trust fund here. I have 2 specific questions for you. The first is actually for you, which is to ask about to what degree the Panorama Solutions database and the Biofin Solutions database overlap or correspond. What are the key differences between them as resources for the rest of us? And then I have a second question, which is for the Oasis platform, which is, we are here in Mozambique looking at ways to provide incentives to the private sector through access to finance for social entrepreneurs and for businesses that make a biodiversity impact or a positive biodiversity impact by means of their business models. And I was wondering to what extent the Oasis can help us find financing to channel to these initiatives. Thanks.
Thanks so much. I might firstly ask Tabby to answer the second question on Oasis.
Sure. Thank you, Sean. Yeah, a good sounds like a good project you've got going there. So Oasis, we basically gather entrepreneurs on the ground and then try and connect them with opportunities either locally, nationally, or internationally. And every kind of local case does vary a lot with what the focuses are and which kind of investment sources would be most appropriate. So it would be a case of kind of, yeah, taking this discussion more directly and looking at options and what's kind of locally appropriate. But there is, I think Oasis provides a really good platform to evidence that impact that's happening on the ground by private sector, and then kind of connect them with either investors or with other kind of social businesses on the ground that would be invested in by them. So yeah, it would be great if you want to get in touch with us directly. We can continue a discussion on that. I hope that answers kind of basically the question.
Thanks, Tabby. And just to your first question, Sean, and Maria might get you to chime in as well. So Biofin, I guess there is some overlap because the Biofin database or the finance solutions catalog we were talking about maps all finance solutions available for biodiversity projects or countries to take up at a very high level high-level area. And so for the Panorama solutions, they're certainly solutions. Many of them are solutions that are within the Biofin catalog. For Biofin, the core of the project's more to help support countries in developing their knowledge and assessments of what they're currently spending, who are the main players in the biodiversity finance arena, and really finding out what that finance gap is, and then coming up with a biodiversity finance plan that is hopefully taken ownership by the country itself and taken forward. So yes, there is certainly some overlap, but presented in a different way, I guess. But Marie, maybe you like to elaborate a little bit more on Panorama side.
Yeah, thanks, James, and thanks, Sean, for the question. Maybe just to add on Panorama, that the niche of that initiative is really about the specific examples. So what we call solutions are very specific initiatives or project implemented, let's say, by an NGO, or even just a certain aspect of that project that was particularly innovative and particularly successful, and then really drilling into that in terms of what made it successful and what's relevant potentially to share with others for replication. And also, on this particular occasion for the inaugural Pathfinder Award, we worked with Biofin and UNDP on the topic of protected and conserved area financing and resourcing. But Panorama, in principle, is thematically much broader, as I also outlined, and we have these interlinked thematic communities in which solutions are structured, but the sort of the philosophy behind that is also to really support cross-thematic learning. So if you're someone working in fisheries management, let's say, then something, a solution that has been found in forestry, or at least a building block of that solution, might also be really relevant for you. So that's also part of the core idea behind Panorama. I hope that helps answer your question.
Thanks, Marie. We've got a question for the African context, but unfortunately, Dale, we haven't got anyone representing from there left in the webinar. So I'll recommend you follow up directly with Dale or Candice, and we can share the contacts when we send out the materials from this webinar. A question for Oasis. Tabby, if you're listening, do you face the problem where local groups have projects that are too small for international investors to invest in, as they tend to finance larger portfolios? And if so, how do you help address this?
So we actually have mostly quite small businesses on the website, and it's one of the main aims is to represent those small businesses and those ones that are often very hard to find for investors, and bring them onto this internationally visible platform to allow investors to either invest in kind of the collective community, or to invest in a specific sector, for example, or to kind of drill down and actually find these individual businesses. So no project is too small, but I would stress that it's really important to then kind of formalize that often informal data and impact information, and make that a collective, and kind of pull that information together to then represent how actually at a larger scale it is. Every business kind of contributes to a much wider impact. So I hope that so I hope that answers a little bit the question.
Thanks, Tabby. We've got a few more minutes, so if anyone has any more questions, please, you can raise your hand and ask directly, or type them into the question pane. A question here for Billy again, and that is around what drew you or the founders of Musungi to restore or make restore the Musungi Geo Reserve. Well, just briefly Billy, on the background of what the genesis of Musungi?
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. So just to give you a brief background on Masungi, so in 1996, there was a joint venture between um, the government, DNR, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and a group called Blue Star, which some of our founders are part of. So the initial concept was actually to save the land. So the department needed to partner with the private sector to make sure that this area is developed and protected sustainably. So the land is owned by the government, but it asked a private sector party to help manage it. So the initial concepts are very different from what it is today. And I'm very thankful for that. So I think the initial concept was like a nature park, but also providing housing and things like this. But because it didn't fit well with the natural area and also the market, the intention and the objective was skewed more heavily towards conservation, which is what the area deserves. And so from 1996 to 2016, this area was strictly a reserve. So nobody could go in as tourists. It was strictly manned by people, and there's this concept of being able to reheal itself. So the forest basically rehealed itself. For this specific project, we didn't need to plant so many trees. We just needed to make sure that human disturbance is controlled. So that's one of the things that helped us restore the area. Why we felt it's important, aside from we have the task too, it's one of our responsibilities. There's a lot of threats in the area. As you can see, the limestone are made of rocks. And these are primary material for cement. So as you can imagine, Manila is building more buildings and infrastructure, and hence we are being threatened by all of these companies trying to use the rocks or whatever natural resources we have. So it's an ongoing challenge. To this day, we are still surrounded by these quarrying companies. So you can just see the contrast of the difference in objectives in terms of what we plan to do. So now the foundation is what leads the conservation efforts, not just for financing, which is one of the reasons why we opened the area, but also for education and awareness. So we need to build public awareness about what Masungi, what it contributes to the community and to the Philippines as a whole, what are the unique species, what it contributes to water quality in the area. So why we need to protect this, it's number one, it's our responsibility. Number two, there's so many threats, and we must be able to bring out public awareness and support. And number three, we need to finance it. So that's some of the motivations, aside from, of course, our dedication and appreciation for nature and our passion to preserve it. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Billy. We've got no other participants with their hands up or additional questions. I'll just put it out there again. If anyone's got a follow-up question, please. Here we go. We've got one more. A question for all winners that we've still got online. Did you, and I guess this relates to your time coming together at the COP and the networking done through that interaction. How did you find any ideas for working together or from each other? Let's start with Miriam.
Yeah, thanks, James. It's still early days, but Oasis and Pond are exploring if there's an opportunity to work together, because we also work in a biosphere reserve, and also around protected areas there's a need for social entrepreneurs. And I've shared the information of Oasis to within the Prespa region, and maybe early next year we might have a Skype call with Colin and Tubby to explore further if there's a scope for cooperation. So anyhow, I think if you work on the ground, sharing your solution is always a very nice way to get connected to other people in the world and to get to know Billy and yeah, the South African experience, and you'll always learn a lot from that. So it's time well invested. But concrete, we might have something between Oasis and Pond that might happen.
Thank you. And I'll ask Tabby, I know Colin's not here, but I know that that was critical and very beneficial side of being involved in these awards. Tabby, do you have any comments on how this has led to potential collaboration in between the award winners and more broadly with others through this process?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with Miriam. The value of kind of getting people together physically it can't be underestimated, and I think all the award winners being together in Egypt was definitely very beneficial, not only to share ideas but also for future collaborations. And we look forward to discussions with Miriam and with Pont going into the future. And the award has definitely been a really good kind of discussion point for us going forward with other collaborations. We work on a very much a social capital basis, so kind of if we have shared understanding with organizations or with groups, then we're very open to collaborate, and it's kind of an emergent process. If yeah, kind of ideas align, then we can channel the funding, or we can aim to find funding to support collaborations. And we have been working quite a lot with a few universities in Scotland, one of which is Napier University, who have one of the first blockchain research centres based in Edinburgh. So we're looking at collaborating on some funding applications with them to build blockchain into Oasis, specifically for ocean plastic reductions. We're also in discussions with the Scottish Government and the UNDP fund, which Colin mentioned. We've been invited to be on the working group to kind of inform that fund of £100 million. So that's really exciting. And we're also continuing collaborations with UNESCO, one project specifically in Costa Rica. So there's lots of new and exciting collaborations coming up, and we also actually do workshops over here in Scotland or abroad to try and spread this idea and get people physically together and visiting social entrepreneurs and seeing some of those really good projects on the ground. So Panorama's been amazing for just connecting people and having a platform to then share the full kind of solution and all of the building blocks.
Thanks, Tabby. And Billy, would you like to just briefly mention any collaboration that's come out of this or ideas through this process?
We have a lot of ideas actually. But what I really appreciate about the platform or Panorama is the community. And so we met everyone in Egypt at the COP 14, and just knowing that we could reach out anytime to James, to Marie, to all the winners and the organizers to ask for advice. It's a huge deal. The Philippines is great, but we still have much to learn from countries like South Africa, for example. So just reaching out to all these experts and knowing that there's a community of like-minded people working on solutions is very important. One particular project that we want to build with everyone is the app that I mentioned a while ago, which is on visitor management. So that one we'd like to ask for inputs from everyone who are implementing or even not implementing sustainable tourism to be able to build a scalable digital solution for sustainable tourism in protected and conserved areas. So that one I'm looking forward to, and I'm going to reach out with everyone soon about this.
Wonderful. Thank you, Billy, and thank you everyone for joining the webinar. We've run out of time now, so we'll wrap things up. I'd just like to thank again all the speakers, Dale for standing in for Candice, Colin, and Billy and Miriam, and of course Marie. Thanks so much for joining us on a Monday towards the end of the year, when I know everyone's so busy trying to get ready for a break, I hope. But again, thanks so much, and it's been wonderful to hear these lessons from our Pathfinder Award winners. So we'll wrap it up there, and again, we will be sending all of you that have registered for the webinar all the materials from this webinar, as well as a recording, so you can get those materials and follow up later on with anyone specifically. So with that, we'll end the webinar, and thanks very much again. Thank you.